Really all we have is
So we have a budget workshop. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll get started. The clerk, instead of you taking the roll, Mrs. Bass, let the record reflect that there are 6 board members here. Mrs. McQuinn is absent for the rest of the day. Dr. Fenoy?
yes. At this time, I'd like to turn over our next budget workshop to Mike Berg and Heather Knust.
Yes, good afternoon. Today's budget workshop, the purpose of this workshop was to really follow up on a discussion and a presentation we had on May 8th. I want to just take the board back a little bit. We've been working at the budget for a while now. You actually had your first workshop on December 5th when we looked at the outlook for the upcoming school year, established priorities, and then we went to work with your budget advisory committee. We had a key budget workshop on February 6th where we brought to the board really the recommendations that impacted our school centers. And it was significant this year, more so than past years, because we had the referendum dollars to work with. So we were doing a lot of good things for security, mental health, teacher retention supplements. And we've been pushing each year to get school budgets out earlier. That helps principals recruit the top talent available. So we had school budgets out to them on February 21st, which is the lion's share of our budget. We then went to work on our department budgets. The superintendent dedicated 3 days of his time to meet with every individual department head and review their budget and go evaluate any requests they had. On May 8th, we brought to you the items that made it past that review and that were being recommended. We had spent some time with your budget advisory committee going through those. But we fielded some questions on May 8th, and we just, the board made the request that we kind of take a step back, allow some more time for that review, and then come back here today to kind of wrap it up. Just looking out ahead on the budget timeline, we are working towards a tentative budget adoption on July 31st. We will have another budget workshop expected on July 24th to take you through some changes to the capital budget for the next, both our 5 and 10-year plan. We had some good news lately with the impact fees, and we got a little flexibility out of Tallahassee on how we can spend our capital dollars, so we're incorporating some changes there that we'll bring back to you. But today is really to pick up kind of where we left off on May 8th. I do want to share we got some recent data on the national, the national education statistics and where Florida ranks. And you may recall we were 44th previously. Florida did fall to 45th in the country, and we predicted this because of the insistence on the legislature to roll back school taxes. And the latest data available is actually FY17. So we could very well see Florida fall further in the next couple of years as this data becomes available. At 45th in the country, we trail the national average by $3,125 per student. Just to gauge the significance of that, if Florida were to advance to the mid-range and be at the midpoint and be in the 25 seat or so, that would generate over $531 million a year for our operating budget, which is huge, right? Our entire operating budget is $2.1 billion now, so $500 million is a significant amount. So I just want to keep the public, keep putting this in front of people, because it really speaks to the importance of the referendum that our community overwhelmingly supported and why that is so critical. As I said, the general fund budget's $2.1 billion. 75% of that is budgeted directly in our schools. And that includes not just our schools, but the charter schools, and then also those referendum dollars that are going directly to our schools. So 75% right in school budgets. You've got 8% of our budget into departments to support departments, which is really, that's fairly lean if you look at other districts across the country. And then if you dig into departments, that includes transportation, and transportation is a significant expense, about $50 million a year, and roughly, a third of that could be attributed to transportation. So that's the big budget picture. I want to, before I hand this over to Ms. Knust, I do want to share some good news and give Ms. Knust and her team some credit. Many years ago, when I first started in district, I was able to apply for an award from the Government Finance Officers Association on the budget book itself, right? And that's when we started developing a more comprehensive document. And to get that award, you had to check off certain criteria that you included, different forecasts and analysis and different pieces of information. And that was a good achievement at the time. The GFOA has really taken it a step further in recent years. And they now, to apply or to qualify for an award, what they call the best practices in school budgeting, you have to show your whole budget process from start to finish and how you use the budget to support the strategic plan. How do you work with the community and your oversight committee? And Ms. Knust had to compile about 800 pages worth of documentation, improve our budget book even further, and then also really utilize a lot of the good work that was done on the academic side and the superintendent with the strategic plan and how all this ties together. And we recently received that award. We were one of the 8, there's only 8 districts in the country that have received this award, and we're the first in Florida. So that was a pretty significant achievement, and I just wanted to give Ms. Knust some credit. And it's a good way to start the meeting. So.
Well, I have to thank my department for preparing that 800 pages of supporting documentation that was submitted, and also Mr. Oswald for participating in the interview that we had to have to show that we are working collaboratively together. I also wanted to mention that we did have our last Budget Advisory Committee meeting yesterday on June 5th, and the Budget Advisory Committee was able to unanimously approve supporting the FY20 budget. And I was able to preview this presentation with them yesterday. So since our last meeting, we did talk about that our FY20 budget is $2.1 billion. We have had some minor changes since our last meeting. The preliminary tax roll came in on May 24th, and it came in a little lower than what was projected by the state. The final certification will be released July 1st, and we're still hopeful that we're going to go back up. But we did have a decrease in the revenue that we're expected to receive, approximately $1 million. And that reduces our per student funding down from 1.61% to 1.54%. And as a result of that decrease in per student funding, we also had to adjust the amount we set aside for employee salary bargaining reserve from the $16.1 million to the $15.4 to align with that decrease. We were also able to receive the actual FRS rates, and so originally we had projected a 0.25% increase in FRS. The actual was 0.21, so we're able to reduce the impact for FRS. And we also adjusted the state mandates to just reflect the impact for district schools, backing out the impact for charter schools. So if you were to compare this budget outlook to our last presentation on May 8th, you'll see that there was a slight decrease of that $1 million in our net revenue available of $44.3 million. And as I just discussed, we did have that decrease in FRS from 2.5 million to 2.1. Also, the reduction in the categoricals to reflect just the district portion. And with the decrease in revenue, there was also a slight decrease in the contingency in order to maintain that compliance of the 3%, which is board policy. And that 1.6 million really relates to the FEFP, increase in FEFP revenue. There was no change to the annualized salary settlements or the projection of the additional staff that are needed. And then also, here's where you'll see the decrease in the employee salary bargaining reserve. It was 16.1 million. It's been reduced to 15.4. And we're going to go into a little more detail into the school-based investments as well as the department-based investments. We're going to really walk through each piece of the pie that was on that previous slide. And we had also talked about in the last meeting the realignments and estimated savings, and those were realized through a reduction in the worker comp rate as well as a reduction in the use of the contracted police services. So our budget is actually balanced, and we do have a slight surplus. That's including the reduction in the preliminary tax roll, and we are hopeful that we will see an increase in that tax roll come July 1st. So we're going to start with that first piece of the pie, which is the schools. The schools are the largest piece of the school district budget. That process really starts in the fall, and school budgets are built based on projected enrollment. So projected enrollment is a real driver in our budget. We released school budgets on February 20th. We had some just minor changes within the school allocation. We made some changes within ELL. We invested over approximately $2 million, which was funded through realignments and changes within the ELL allocation. So we added 14 teachers, 6 community language facilitators, and also some additional coordinators. Additional investments in schools include a testing coordinator at each high school, as well as extra duty days for data processors and ESC contacts to provide additional supports during the summer months at the school sites. We also increased the non-salary allocation for fine arts, and this is the first time that we've had an increase in this supply budget in probably close to 20 years. So the total investments at the school sites is $5 million. And keep in mind, this does not include the referendums and referendum initiatives. And if we offset that against the $2 million in realignments within ELL, it's around $3 million net impact. So now we're going to move on to the next piece of the pie, which is the referendum. So with the referendum, we're going to be generating a little over $200 million. We're investing $20 million in mental health initiatives, adding 1 position at each school site, as well as additional extra duty days, school psychologists, and expanding our co-located services for mental health. We're investing additional $20 million in security. We're adding approximately 110 officers, as well as additional support staff, supplies, and equipment. And we're able to continue to fund police aides and monitors and add additional funding at secondary schools for after-school events. We're able to continue to fund over 700 elementary art, music, and PE teachers, Choice and Career Academy. And we also added 2 teachers on special assignment to expand and support the fine arts curriculum. Over $100 million of the referendum funds is for teacher recruitment and retention supplements. And the teachers will see that first payment on their August 23rd paycheck. So the third piece of the pie is charter schools. So the charter school allocation, again, is just like our school budget allocation. It's driven by enrollment. We have to project what we think the projected enrollment for charter schools is going to be. It looks like there's going to be 4 new charter schools opening next year. There's always the potential that there could be some closures as well. But we're starting to see, the big blue bar is enrollment at district schools. The smaller gray bar is enrollment at charter schools. And you can see that our enrollment is starting to really level off at this point.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, so that's not just a Palm Beach phenomenon. The state of Florida, as the student enrollment has kind of tapered off. And Miami-Dade and Broward actually experienced declining enrollment. This past school year, we were projected by the state to grow by about 2,000 students, and at the end of the school year here, our actual growth was less than 100 students. And next year, we're projected to grow by about 700 students, and we'll have to really we can't take that for granted based on what happened this year. We're just going to have to watch enrollment really closely, and that has a direct impact on our revenue. We've been fortunate the past 4 or 5 years. We've been growing, and when you're growing and adding enrollment and able to serve students and utilize some of the existing personnel to do that, that generates some economies of scale and additional money to work with. So we're really keeping an eye on this, because if we start to see our enrollment decline, that could create some additional challenges with the budget.
So the next piece of the budget is related to department budget. That piece of the pie is about 8%. Transportation alone makes up approximately 30% of the total department budgets. Department budgets are built very differently than school budgets. Department heads are required to go through a line item review every year, and they do sit down, as Mr. Burke had mentioned, with Dr. Fenoy and a one-on-one presentation, and it takes place over a 3-day period. So we finalized those presentations in February, and we presented those results at the last board workshop. And at that last meeting, the board recommended that we break out those changes by division, that it was easier than looking at it by our strategic plan initiatives. And so that's what you'll see today, and I know that we also provided that earlier as well. So we're going to start with the board direct reports. So the total changes within the board direct reports within the Inspector General is $245,000. Only minor changes since the last meeting. The General Counsel has changes of $224,000, so total changes within the board direct reports of $469,000. Next, we're moving on to the divisions within the district. So the deputy superintendent has total changes of $365,000, but that's offset against realignments within his division. He was able to eliminate part-time and system, which offsets at least one of the instructional specialist positions, as well as additional non-salary. So the net impact is $245,000. So within the Chief of Human Resources, the total changes are $601,000, offset against realignments within that division of eliminating a director position. So the director position that's being added is really being offset against a director position that was eliminated of $120,000. So the net impact is $481,000. The Chief Operating Officer has a total changes of $672,000. With offset by some realignments within non-salary of $16,000, total changes of $655,000. A majority of these changes are really non-salary related, uniforms for custodians for security purposes, as well as increase contract services related to infectious diseases. Within the Chief of Staff, you can see that there were some changes within this division since the last meeting. There was a reduction, and so the total changes is $58,000. And within the CFO division, a total increase of $31,000, primarily related to just annual software increases. So the total department budget changes for divisions totals $1.7 million, offset by realignments of $257,000 for a net impact of $1.4 million. But once you also offset that against the savings within the worker comp rate and also the reduction within the contracted police services, there is no net impact for these changes. So the next piece of the pie is the non-K-12 program budgets. Those program budgets, or the non-K-12 activities, are revenue generating and self-sustaining. So we have our after-school program, adult and community ed, a voluntary pre-K, and then miscellaneous donations that come in to support the school sites. And we keep those separate from the regular budget since they are self-sustaining and those funds carry over for that specific purpose. The next piece of the budget is the school and county-wide costs. The school costs, and it seems like a large amount of $40 million, but that's just really a holding account until we can wait, and we have to finalize and close out the current fiscal year. And once we finalize and close out the current fiscal year, we can allocate the costs back to the school sites. So it includes items like APIB and ACE testing, funds that we have to have set aside for the schools, but until we close out the year, we don't have the amount that we can allocate to the schools. So this is really just a holding place until we finalize and close out the school year, as well as for new categoricals like the turnaround program in the low 300. We keep it here as a holding place until we actually have the schools that qualify. Once we have those schools, we allocate those funds out. And then the countywide costs, those are items that can't be associated with any one department that are paid out centrally. We also have capital maintenance transfer. It's approximately $100 million, and there's a transfer that's made from the capital projects fund to the general fund to pay for eligible capital-related costs. like property and flood, and other capital-related items that don't qualify to be within the capital projects fund. And then other remaining components, we have utilities. We expect that to remain relatively consistent with the current year. That's $49 million. Employee leave payouts, we expect that to remain relatively consistent with the current year, which is at $17 million. And the board contingency reserve will be increasing to $64 million to comply with board policy to maintain 3% of total appropriations. So as a result of the referendum, we've been able to make some big investments this year. We've invested over $100 million in the teacher recruitment and retention supplements. We've put a lot into security and mental health initiatives. And we were able to set aside a salary reserve of $15.4 million. And that's really related to the increase in the BSA that we had in the FVFP. And we still have to wait for enrollment. You know, there are still a lot of variables out there that can impact the budget that we're going to make sure to keep watching. I already talked about that they release a preliminary tax roll. The final tax roll will be out on July 1st. And then we have to watch enrollment and see where it actually comes in, starting at the beginning of the school year, and we monitor that throughout the year.
I just want to mention, so I know with the salary reserve at $15.4 million, you know, that's that's not meeting everyone's expectations. And as we work to finalize the budget, any dollars that we can free up through either closing the books on FY19 or with the tax roll, that's where we'll be directing any dollars we can come up with to try to bolster that reserve, and we'll report back to you on our success with that in July.
And so with the budget development timeline, there is one minor change. The Budget Advisory Committee, since they were able to approve and support the budget in our last meeting, we did cancel the meeting that was scheduled on June 13th. So they did have their final meeting on June 4th. And then you'll be approving the advertisements for budget adoption on July 24th. Tentative budget adoption is on July 31st, and that's when the chair of the Budget Advisory Committee will be presenting the report of the Budget Advisory Committee. So you'll have that on July 31st, and final budget adoption is on September 4th.
Ms. Brill and Mr. Shaw.
Thank you, and thank you. This is very comprehensive and very helpful. But this is really for the superintendent, and I'm not looking at our direct reports, but you know, when I look at the increases in the superintendent's chiefs and the deputy, and I'm not saying I'm against it, but there's an increase of almost $1.5 million in their budgets. That's causing me to pause. I'd like to know, and I'm not expecting an answer now, but if you would please let us know what the trend is in the ESE department, multicultural department, transportation department, and other departments in the district. Are we asking them to cut their budgets? Are we increasing their budgets? Because 1.5 million seems like a lot, and I, did meet with people. I'm fine with our direct reports, my meetings with them, but I just need to know what those other departments look like, and if we are asking them to make cuts as we increase those departments.
Mr. Burke, you can respond to that.
Yeah, just real quick. No, we did not require any reductions from the departments you mentioned, or this wasn't a year where we went in, and we've had those years where we go in and try to make a 5% or 10% cut. We did not do that. These are the growth items that basically made it through the vetting process. And as Ms. Knus mentioned, you're absolutely right. It's putting $1.5 million more into these departments. We were able to offset some of that. This year, we paid a premium on the school police overtime when we contracted out for the cities to cover some schools as we've staffed up. So we feel like we're going to save money next year that we now have 80 officers that we've hired. And so we're tapping some of those savings basically to say that would cover these increases. Just as a follow-up, if you could just, though, come back, I don't need a whole breakdown, but just I'd like to see the trend, from last year to this year for those departments, for the service departments also, just to see, what the increase is before I approve the budget. That's no problem. We'll put that analysis together, get it to the board.
Mr. Shaw.
This is not something that I think that we need tonight, but at some point, can we get an update on how the hiring's going on the school-based mental health counselors?
Mrs. Whitfield?
Thank you. I was just thinking about, what was that, a couple years ago, 3 years ago, when we did our evaluation to find out the balance between administrative versus instructional. Remember that? Can you tell us what that change has become now with these new, just as you guys are working forward with that shift? Because it looks like we're going to go higher on the percentage of administration, and I just want to make sure we're staying within what is like the national norm of that. Thanks.
Yes. Yeah, ERS had been in, and that was one of the first things they looked at was how did we compare with, like, were we top-heavy administrative costs? And I believe we're still in line with, they had a sample, they had some other districts that were comparable to us, and we compared pretty favorable back then. We'll estimate what this will do and how that may change.
Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you, and this is definitely laid out very well, and I appreciate meeting with everybody. Just a few points, and maybe these are small dollars, but first thing I'd like to say is for the Broad piece, we did talk a lot at the last meeting about that, and it was clearly explained, but I would like to see us get a profile. Since we've been doing Broad here in Palm Beach County for the last few years, I'd like to get a profile of how we're doing with that. How many have we had over the last 3 to 5 years? Have we been able to keep these people once we pay 2/3 of their salary? Are they leaving us? Some kind of a data sheet to tell me if this is worth it, since I see a lot of the departments and the direct reports are asking for it. So we do need to have some history as to where we are with that. I was checking in some of the other big 8 districts, and they don't have as many Broads as we have. But if I get that sheet, I can kind of tell how we are looking and why we're using it, and is it going to help us in the long run. And then as I looked at this on the travel, the increase in travel, professional development, which I know is very important for us to learn and grow, I'd like to know, how did we do last year as to when we were asking for some additional money? How much did we have in those buckets last year? If we're asking for $1,000 more dollars or $2,000 more dollars this year, how much did we have last year? That would be helpful for me to know that, maybe we're doing more or maybe we don't need any more. So that's something I would like to look at. And then I would like to say that I like to see those less buckets on here as for saying we're cutting something, because I see we're asking for a whole lot more. And I looked at this and I thought about the alternative schools. I've spoken to Dr. Fanoy as well as Mr. Oswald. I had a chance to visit the alternative schools in the district this year. And I know we say we're giving to schools, but I just really would like to know how we're really working to get them what they need. When I visited this year, I noticed that especially our intensive South school, we needed more in the police area for safety. I was there at that time. But then as I talked to all those principals and I spoke to Mr. Oswald about it, I don't know if we package that so that we can make sure we take care of our neediest children. I think we have them lumped into all the schools are getting this. I think it needs to be laid out to me as a board member as to how we're really staffing those schools. Are they getting what they need to work with our most neediest children? And certainly I know the facilities need a whole lot of upkeep, but what I found out in talking with the principals and others at those buildings is that there's a lot to be desired and more is needed. So in this budget piece, could somebody kind of give me a little profile of what we looked like last year, what we look like this year, and if we're getting those improvements, especially for alternative ed? Thank you.
Dr. Robinson?
Okay, thank you. So, yes, and I actually have a discussion item on alternative ed, so we can dig into that a little bit more. In terms of the Broad, people, I would like to add to that analysis, what projects have they done? Because I could tell you, I fully support bringing on these young, fresh, analytical minds. So, but just so that the board is clear, show us what projects they've done. In terms of the trend analysis, I would also like to see the past 5 years of the budget for the Office of African American, Latino, and Gender Studies. And I think, and demarcate on that, if you would, please, when we added Latino and Gender Studies to the office. Because I think that was part of multicultural at one point. Okay, now I have a lot of other things that I want to be addressed later. So one is if there's a thought on why the tax rolls decrease and how that impacts the referendum dollars. The next one is that I have to say about these what's now called the behavioral health professionals that I used to call the MTSS. And I was promised one in every school. And I know we've got these multiple layers of people now. I'm going to work with Mr. Oswald and Dr. Sheffield, but I just need to make sure that we don't disproportionately staff with people who are there to treat as opposed to people who are there to triage and meet the child where they are, right, and address their immediate needs. I don't want us to develop a system of diagnosis and treatment and referral out and pathologizing children, because I know that is not our intent, but I'm concerned. I know we have some things that are mandated by law. I understand that. But we need to make sure we are counterbalancing with having the folks who are closest to the children in terms of culturally, socially, understanding who they are and not pathologizing, but understanding that, something happened to Johnny and we need to address that without diagnosing, right? Okay. The middle school after-school programs, can you just tell me how is that funded? Is that funded through operating dollars?
Yes, we, that initiated with Safe Schools dollars. Now we're utilizing all our Safe Schools really for school police, but yeah, it's the general fund is supporting that. It's not a fee-based program.
Okay, so I could just tell you that this is one of the areas, this is going to be the next thing I harp on repeatedly, okay? So this is going to be my new MTSS. I'm just going to warn you, right? Because I think that children should be in extended after-school programs to expand their horizons. Those who can't go off to camp in the Northeast during the summer especially need to have after-school programs where they get exposed to robotics and chess and the arts, so forth. So I want us to, as we move forward, to see how we might be able to do that, whether it's partnerships, grants, whatever. But like by hook or by crook, we have to make sure we have these programs for children. On page 25, at least according to my notes, the value adjustment board costs us money. That's what it looked like to me. Am I misunderstanding?
Yes, there is a cost to operating the Value Adjustment Board, and so after that process is completed, the county splits out the cost, and they send us an invoice, and we have to reimburse our portion. So it's around $200,000.
Okay, and so on go forward, can you give us a report later? This is not urgent at all, but I'm just curious to know how often the actions of the Value Adjustment Board decrease the money coming to the schools. Because as I understand the process, this is people who are challenging their
Yes.
whatever the
Right. Yeah, Ms. Canoe spoke to the administrative costs of that whole
Okay.
process, but there's another impact. If people are successful and they get their values reduced, then
Right.
yeah, it reduces our revenue. I think in Palm Beach County, we're pretty fortunate. It hasn't been a big problem for us. I know in Miami-Dade, it was a major issue where they were seeing their tax revenue significantly impacted by the actions of the Value Adjustment Board.
Okay, well, that's good. If you would just provide some numbers.
But yeah, we'll try to work on that.
Okay, in terms of school supports, I hope that we are stabilizing the school supports and that's reflected in the budget. Because before, we used to go from this additional supports for the low 300, then when the list of that schools changed and we took away those supports and gave them to these schools, and it was just a destabilizing effect. So I would not now just explain to us later, and maybe it comes from Mr. Oswald, Dr. Sheffield, or whoever, but how we are no longer doing that.
The states helped a little, just real quick, states helped with that as well, because now they measured over a 3-year average rather than just a single year. So
Okay.
that itself stabilizes it, but then we'll work with Mr. Oswald on the rest as far as what we do locally.
Okay, great, thank you. Then the other thing is the changes recommended for ELL. It does, and again, this is, you can respond later. Does that align with recommendations from ERS or any other outside agency? Because I have a vague recollection. You don't have to answer, but just
Yep,
send
Yes,
it
it
to us.
does.
in a-
You're correct.
Yes, it
We
does.
had 2 takeaways, ELL and ESE from ERS,
Okay.
really, and we've been working on that.
Okay, and then the fine arts allocation, I'm really, really, really happy to see us putting some money into the arts like this. But I don't understand 2 teachers for fine arts curriculum and why that's necessary, and that can be a follow-up from our deputy or CAO too. But I'm thrilled to see it. I just don't quite understand the need for 2 teachers for the curriculum writing. So in terms of the boards people, I am now settled with the 3 additional positions for the OIG, in case anybody cared. But I'm still uncomfortable with the 2 attorneys. I'm not settled there yet, and I'll have to spend some more time with Ms. Rico before we have our first reading of the budget. The manager for equity and access, I still think should be higher on the food chain. I will fight that fight in a different area. And the other thing I would like for us to look at on a go forward is a focus on hiring police aides. And that is not to take away from any sworn officers, but as a pathway to replenishing our forces as people retire. So maybe the police aides, we could bring the police aides on. It's a similar conversation as with the paraprofessionals and academic tutors, right? So we bring folks on, get to see them, they can see the real work, and then maybe we can help support police aides to go to the academy. Then we have our future police force. I just think that that's something we need to look at, so. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Robinson, in that particular vein, that process already exists.
Okay.
Even the previous chief started that. But to your point, I think we're looking to be more intentional
Exactly.
with that. And I think I've heard Chief Kitzrow and his team talk about even creating sort of academies in schools for our children to get into that work early, that will then be, groomed by our own officers, then supported by the board to go to the police academy, and then to come back and return to work in our environment.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead, Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank those who gave me their org charts. I didn't get them from everybody, so I'll be making the rounds again since we're not finalizing anything today other than reviewing. But I was looking at the VPK and the countywide costs, as well as the VPK up on page 24. So now, will this give us additional VPK sites with this additional money that we have, the 9.8, and then also part of that 41.4 million? The 41.4 million. Would that give us more sites now?
No, that's maintaining the current sites that we have.
So we need more. We need more money. Yes, okay, we need more. Okay, and let's see if I had anything else I wanted to say.
With the VPK, we really need the state to do more, because with the dollars that you really have control over, it's dedicated for K through 12, so it's, as much as it supports our mission and all that, we
I
have
was
limited.
thinking we were getting something when I saw those
Yeah.
numbers, but it's just the same, so that was very clear to me. And also, I was happy to see that we're doing something with the maintenance piece for the custodial piece. That was very exciting to me. But as I keep digging through this, I would like to have the org charts for each one of these groups, and some of you gave them to me and some of you didn't, so I am requesting those. Thank you. Oh, I just heard every board member wants them. Email them to everybody. Thank you.
I would just a couple questions. So for a long time, I've been hearing from our school psychologists that they don't have enough staffing, and I see we're adding 40 additional psychologists. Is that going to meet their needs? Because I've been told they're so far behind, they can't get a lot of the work done that they need to get. So is 40 enough to make sure that we cover everything we have to cover under MSD and everything else?
We also added additional time this summer, extra duty days for the psychologists, with the idea that they could catch up on some of that paperwork and backlog, and so that the impact of the 40 positions would not be lost to that, and they would actually be out there working with our students. I guess I can't answer the question as far as is that enough. I think it's a great start. We could be coming back with more requests in future years, but we were able to meet they felt like that was a good number to start with. You can only hire so many of those folks that are just, the availability is limited as well. So,
but isn't there somebody in charge of that department that can tell you if 40 is enough?
Yes, and we have a new assistant superintendent in charge of that department. So they'd be the expert.
By the next time, can you make sure that we check?
Sir.
You check with her or him? I forgot who that is.
Okay.
Okay. Mrs. East, I'm sorry. And then I see we have 3 middle school counselors per middle school, 3 guidance counselors per middle school. Are we going to make sure those guidance counselors aren't just added to do bus duty and everything else? I mean, these are actually going to be guidance counselors?
So answer is yes, and just to elaborate a little bit more, one of the things we've done, because the referendum is so critical, and we just face so much scrutiny with everything we do for security and mental health, and we have developed, the principals were given a form that they have to sign and attest to that these resources will be used as intended, and we're treating it like a grant, right? So there's some requirements that we've spelled out what's expected. We've asked them to sign to assure us that's how the resources will be used, and we'll be working with Mr. Oswald and the regional superintendents to make sure that occurs.
Okay. Well, if the principals say they're doing it, I'll trust them on that one.
Okay.
With respect to art, I see, for years we've been hearing from the art teachers that they're not getting any money. They have to dip in their own pockets for supplies. So I saw we're providing $4,000 per middle and per high school. Who has the authority to spend? I mean, is that for the art teachers themselves, or how's that going to be? I just want to make sure everybody's treated fairly, and that, the teachers that have been complaining for years are dipping their own pocket. They're going to have a chance to use that money instead of dipping in their own pocket. So how's that going to work?
Well, it's actually part of that same form that I mentioned earlier. But all these enhancements that we've provided this year, that they go to where they're intended. The mechanics of that, we do have to entrust our school principals that they'll manage their budget and allow those teachers access. We don't budget to like the teacher level, but I think it's been made clear to the schools that's the expectation. The reception from the principals when we rolled out the budget was they were thrilled to get the money. They recognize there's a need, so I don't really foresee a problem. I think it's long overdue, and I think it's. You're also going to see some more money in your capital budget recommendation to replace musical instruments. So I think we're doing a lot of good things to support the arts this year.
Okay.
So to Dr. Robinson's earlier question and to the chairman's questions around the arts, the 2 positions that were approved by me in the budget, one was an existing grant position that was going away. So right now, there's a gentleman by the name of Mr. Edric Rhodes, who's actually responsible for the arts for the entire district by himself. And so one of those positions was a position that were going away, so I agreed to give him that position back. And then one additional position, because we are seeing the expansion of fine arts programs across the district. So the team will be made up of someone who's in the arts field, in the music field, and the theater field. And so that team of 3 will now be responsible for making sure all these additional funds that we're allocating to schools are used in the appropriate manner. In some cases, they've already started digging into schools, especially in our low-income communities where they don't have choruses and bands, starting those programs. And a lot of our high schools, again, as a former musician, because I can't play right now, but the idea of replacing instruments was a big deal, because not just from the aesthetics, there's a medical reason why you need to replace some of these old instruments. So again, it's not perfect that we're not going to replace everything, but we think it's a good start. But Mr. Rose and his new team need to help manage all of this. And we think about contracts associated with flag lines and all the different, so again, I think Mr. Rose has done an amazing job now that I know who he is. But if we're going to continue to expand, the UB Kansas, all these different schools, we got to give the young man a team. And we actually came to, he came to Executive Cabinet about 9 months ago, 10 months ago, and we asked him to give us a comparison to other large districts' fine arts departments. I will say that we're still woefully very small, But this was just a baby step that we tried to take to make sure that he has the support to continue with the great things we see in our schools and expanding them.
Dr.
So thank you for that explanation. And so, yes, I see it now, right? But I just want to stress the equity component of it, because there are so many children who do not have access to the arts in their private lives. And it is such an enriching area that I just want to make sure that we work with true intention to ensure that all of our children are exposed. Thank you.
Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you, and maybe I heard this, but just to be clear, for the police aides for the elementary schools, is there a pot of money in here that I missed? For each elementary school right now, we just have a police officer.
No, we're not budgeting for an aide at every school.
So we still have that opening piece for the elementary. As I talked to Chief Kissero, he said he was working on getting that done. So there's no money here for elementary coverage.
No, there are some.
There's some, but not beyond
Yeah,
what
police aides, for someone to be
Just-
out there when people
yeah.
walk into an elementary school. Yes,
So there were.
Not the officer. I'm looking, the officer may be inside the school. At every middle and secondary school, you have someone out there actually supervising, checking the people before they go in. So I'm wondering, is there a pot of money for that at the elementary level?
There is not. What there is allocated, and what we actually did this year is we looked at schools that did not have a single point of entry, and we allocated a police aide so that to provide some additional supervision. So we have police aides out there, but they're not on a one-to-one ratio with our schools. Ms. Knust, I don't know, do you have how many we do have budgeted out there?
I believe it's around 30. So I have to go back and check,
You've
but I
got
believe it's around 30
Right,
to
we've got
40
109 elementary schools, so roughly a third.
Can we look at it? Because I do travel a lot, and I see sometimes it's wide open, so if we could check that.
Okay,
Dr.
we'll bring
Robinson.
that back.
So I think you just partially answered this, but because I'm certain every middle and high school doesn't have somebody there. And so I think I just need to fact check that.
Well, every secondary school has a school security monitor. And then also with the school police aides, almost all the high schools have a police aide, and select middle schools and elementary schools, based on the single point of entry, have a police aide. So we can give you a breakdown of which schools have aides and which ones have monitors to make it more clear by level so that you can easily see it.
We need to do that in a closed session. That shouldn't be distributed to the board because then it's public information, right? Okay. All right. So, Mr. Burke, as you probably remember, I'm vice chair of the Value Adjustment Board, so I'll get that information for you. I'll get it from the Value Adjustment Board attorney, so you won't have to put that on your...
That'd be a big help, thank you.
So I'll get that for you. And before I forget, because my memory is not any good anymore, so yesterday I met with the library, head of the Palm Beach County Library, and I just want everybody to know that during the summer, our school district provides food at every one of the 17 branches of the library for lunches for our kids. So I'm not sure we publicize that enough to make sure that the children, especially children in areas where their parents aren't home because they're working and these kids have nothing to eat at home, that they know that the local library will have lunch for them. So can we make sure, I'll give this to the clerk, can we make sure this gets on the website, the district website? Okay, all right, great. And if that's it on this workshop, we go to the next one. Mr. Superintendent?
Yes, sir. At this time, I turn it over to Deputy Superintendent Keith Oswald, Glenda Sheffield, Dr. Pete Licata, and Dr. Geraldine Johnson, Dr. Sheffield, excuse me, to go through the Worst Choice Workshop.
And good afternoon, board members. You have requested a kind of a more in-depth workshop on choice programs. And at this time, I'm going to turn over to Chief Academic Officer Sheffield to get us started.
Good afternoon, board members, Dr. Fenoy. The Department of Choice and Career Option, we're definitely excited to present its annual program updates. Within this presentation, Dr. Licata and Dr. Johnson, they will be sharing many of the systems and processes that guides the mission and vision within the department in maximizing the opportunities for our student learners and their families. So we're definitely excited about sharing with you the state of the Department of Choice and Options at this time as we continue again to maximize the potential opportunities for our student learners and in closing the gaps. Because of course we do realize that there are gaps that needs to continue to be closed.
So with that, just want to, as we go through this process, and we're going to go through it very fast, a couple things to keep in mind. We still are looked upon nationally as one of the leaders, and people know that. Some of the things we're really proud of are demographics and the students that attend, and they mirror our and you'll see that in the, but also you see us a lot with this, but there's a group of people, and I want them to stand up right now, that are the choice department, that please stand up, folks. And it's not that big. And they do an amazing amount of support to our schools, and they deserve a lot of the credit for what goes on. They are the workhorses, and they make us look great as a district, so they do deserve a lot of respect and congratulations. Thank you, folks, and they're here to say. But right now, I really want to turn this over to Dr. Johnson. She is the director of this department, and she has been leading the ship very well, and nothing but great things to say about her. And she's going to do this in 15 minutes. I guarantee it.
Turn on the timer.
She'll have a bruise here by the end of the night.
So I'm going to skip over
Turn the clock on back there, please.
some of the pleasantries. I think you guys all know what our mission is. We really are about making sure that we offer families choices and that families are as informed about the many choices that are offered throughout our district so that they can make the best choice for their students. Our mission is right in line with the strategic plan for the school district and the long-term goals. As you can see, we are in line with every single long-term goal, whether it's increasing third grade reading all the way to making sure our students are successful as they exit and graduate from us. So who are we as a department? We are a small department, as you can see, but we're mighty, and we cover a variety of different functions. Some of the most popular processes that you guys are probably more familiar with are the choice lottery process that we take students through, the control open enrollment process, reassignments. We also handle opportunity scholarships, and just this past year we were blessed with the Hope Scholarship and assisting with that. We put two little buses here so that the question always comes up, well, what programs allow for transportation? So we wanted to make sure that we included that. So the two choice processes where students get transportation are when students get assigned to a choice program through the lottery, as well as opportunity scholarship. So what guides what we do? We have a policy, and that policy is 5.016. We brought that policy to the board last year because we actually updated that policy. The 4 bullet points that you see here were the major updates to that policy that we made, adding some information in here regarding duplicate program exemption, addressing the appeal process for students when they are exited from our programs, giving families the opportunity to appeal those decisions, and doing some major updating to some of our forms that our principals complete as they request these programs because they were a little bit outdated. Part of our policy is our procedures manual, which outlines also the entry requirements, or sometimes we may refer to them as eligibility criteria. So one of the things that we were asked to kind of take a deeper dive in is to kind of look at what other districts like us require their students to have for entry. And so as you can see, we do require GPAs, we require auditions for our programs for performing and fine arts, but you'll see 2 very faint check marks next to FSA and prerequisite courses, and those check marks are faint because even though we do have some programs that require them, they are not across the board. So when it comes to FSA scores, we only have 1 program that requires FSA scores, and those are our biomedical science academies that we have the collaboration with FAU College of Medicine. And for the prerequisite courses, we do have a couple of high school programs that require some prerequisite courses. Those are in computer science, like our MSc program at Suncoast and so forth. Some of our programs do require a background check, if you will, like our medical academies, because we have our students going out into hospitals and doctors' offices, so those require that the students have clinical or fingerprinting and background checks. How do we know if we're being successful? So one of the things that we follow, and we show this, we're showing it in a different form this year than we normally do, but you can see the growth over a period of time in terms of the numbers of choice programs that we have brought on board. We also take a look at, well, what programs do students tend to be more interested in? And so this slide shows across the board, K to 12, the top 5 programs. So our medical programs, our STEM programs, STEAM, IB, Montessori, and high technology tend to be the popular programs across the board. But when we break that down by level, in the elementary level, it's our STEAM programs, Montessori, IB, the visual arts, performing arts, and our International Spanish Academy. At the middle school, we take a look at pre-med, high-tech, our pre-engineering, and our pre-culinary. And in high school, pre-med, IB, engineering, culinary, and our innovative interactive technology program at Suncoast. The colored chunks in the bar represent demographics, so you can see in some of our programs there's kind of an equal amount of number of students, and these are all based on the number of applications that were received for these programs. I also want to point out that the popular programs also represent the sectors that our business and industry folks are telling us that we need to have people in. So it's good to see that our students are actually applying for those programs that match the need of our local industries. When we take a look at our 18-19 data in terms of who applied and who was assigned, we can see here that we had 21,665 students who applied, and of those, 14,709 students were assigned. And you can see here based on demographics. The two areas that we continue to work on in terms of just getting students to actually apply happens to be definitely in our ELL population and our ESC students. So to that regard, we've been really focusing on our recruitment efforts, trying to raise awareness and garner the support for these populations. And so one of the things that we're really proud of, they're not here today because they're teachers and they're off, but we're really fortunate to have 2 resource teachers in our office who are out in the communities. They are wherever we need them to be. So you'll see on the next slide here, they're at laundromats, they're in the churches, they're wherever our families are that need the assistance. One of the things, and this was a recommendation, we presented recently twice to the Diversity and Equity Committee, and they gave us some phenomenal feedback, and so we're incorporating some of the ideas and discussions we've had with that committee. So we're going to be adding some pages to our choice booklet with a QR code that someone can scan with their phone, and they will have a video that will play in their language. Because even though we may translate our book in different languages, some people don't read their language. So if they can click on that QR code and see a video in that language, hopefully that will help with getting the information out. So when we provide support in the community, it's important that we provide it prior to the lottery so people know what's available, during the lottery so that they know how to apply, and then after the lottery, because once you get assigned, in order to get that seat, the parent has to accept, and many times people don't know that. So again, we're out in the communities wherever we need to be to assist families throughout this process.
I want to reiterate on that piece because it's important. Just because the parent hasn't responded doesn't mean we give that seat up within the 2 weeks. We usually go 3 weeks in that process. We make sure that that school has contacted and shows proof that that parent has been contacted, because not everyone has an email, not everyone has a phone, that we have a right phone number. We do not give that seat up until we have some sort of contact with that parent, because I think that would hurt us in the long run for the students that really need to be in our programs.
So how do we make decisions about our choice programs, and what are the driving forces behind that? So there are many of them. One happens to be taking a look at our local economy and the labor market. So looking at research studies like the one recently conducted by the BDB that was funded by J.P. Morgan, and to see what are the needs out there. Also being in tune with our stakeholders, whether those stakeholders are students or parents, business and industry, whomever they may be. Back in September, we held a summit right here in the boardroom where we brought a collaboration of different people. We even had parents here because we want to be able to hear all of the various voices to help us make decisions. Transportation is also one of those areas that we consider when we're making decisions. We look at continuums and feeder patterns to make sure we're filling in gaps and we're not creating gaps. Always funding, and that kind of goes without saying. I think the previous workshop kind of alluded to that. And then also taking a look at the space and capacity of our schools, because sometimes we have the desire to put programs in schools, but do we really have the space and the capacity in the school to accommodate those programs? And then more importantly, what's becoming more and more of a challenge for our CTE teachers is finding teachers. We just retired 3 teachers, and between those 3 teachers, there was 100 years of experience. And so replacing those is always a challenge. And so those are some of the things that we look at in terms of decision making. Also, we take a look at legislation, and I'm not going to go too deep into this, but there are 3 things that we're following right now that is impacting some of the decision making that we're doing around career and technical education in particular. One is the governor's executive order, section 1, which is calling for a statewide audit of career and technical education programs across the state. We don't quite know what that's going to look like yet, but we're anticipating getting more technical assistance on that. And then House Bill 7071, we're following that in some of the sections on that will have some impact on what we do in career and tech ed. Most importantly, I want to point you to the bullet that talks about establishing the career and technical education pathway option, which is going to be an 18-credit graduation option now for students, and that is to take place starting this fall. Also, the last bullet, strengthening career and technical education for the 21st century, a fancy title for Perkins 5. That legislation is now in place. We're in a transition year, and part of that is going to call for a comprehensive local needs assessment as we write our grant coming up, paying close attention to special populations, and redefining some of the definitions that were in Perkins 4. So we'll come back later with some more detailed information as we get more technical assistance around some of this legislation. One of the other things that we pay attention to as we're making decisions is where the programs are. So thanks to Dr. Robinson, we've been working really closely with transportation, and this is really a cool thing that we're doing with them. We're making an interactive map. So this is just a snippet, because later on, once we finalize this system, we'll be able to share with you how it works. This is going to be an internal document or system that we use to help us be able to kind of map where all of our programs are within the transportation zones. So this shows our middle school medical academies, where they are throughout the district. The big blue line around it shows the choice transportation zone, and the red shows the attendance zone. So we're working to build this out and have this ready for us to be able to use as we're making decision in terms of where programs will go. Program standardization is another thing that we pay close attention to. So when it comes to our CTE programs and our IB programs and programs that are regulated by some third-party organization such as Cambridge, our curriculums are standardized. The state dictates to us what our CTE programs will look like in terms of the courses, the standards, the benchmarks, the teacher certifications, also Also, they give us ideas around what certifications the students will also take. Something we brought on over the last couple of years is some standardization around STEM and STEAM programs and what they look like. We have a rubric. Julia Mate has done a fantastic job on working with that. So we are really trying to make sure that our new STEAM and STEM programs that come on board are following that matrix first, and then reaching back to some of the more veteran programs that have been around for a while prior to that rubric coming on board, and making sure that they are also following that same process. So there's also standardization around our Montessori program, dual language, and ISA. So even though you can't really see this from here, maybe you can see it a little closer there. This is always a question, too, around our medical academies in terms of the standardization here. So going back to what I said earlier, I'll get you a bigger copy, around CTE programs, the state tells us if you're offering, let's say, allied health assisting, then the courses are going to be the same regardless of where it's offered. Whether it's a choice program where we're bringing in out-of-boundary students, or it's in-house where it's only available for the students who are zoned for that school. You're going to take Health Science 1, you're going to take Health Science 2, and you're going to take that third Allied Health Assisting course. So sometimes we have some programs or strands of medical at one school that we may or may not have at another school, and that's where you may see some differences. A lot of times, the fluctuation in those strands comes into play. If we had a teacher one year who could teach 3 strands, that teacher leaves and goes back to industry. Now we hire someone and they can only teach 1. So that does have an impact. But Dr. Benavente is here, and he works diligently to try to make sure we're replacing those medical teachers as quickly as possible. We do have unique programs, and unique programs are those that they really are the only ones like that in town. And so when we look at where we could potentially grow, these are some of the first places that we also may pay attention to, and we look at the feasibility of being able to replicate these programs. When it comes to career and technical education, we're very strong in the district. We have over almost 50,000 students in grades 6 through 12 taking at least one CTE course. The demographics of those students mirror the demographics in terms of gender with the district, as well as demographics, as you can see from the charts here. When it comes to special populations taking CTE courses, again, we have some work to do because, in my opinion, the special populations here, ESE students, our teen parents, our homeless students, these are the students who really could take advantage of career and technical education, being able to walk out of the door and have employment, have certifications, and be able to sustain after graduation. We are succeeding in career and technical education. As you can see here, this slide shows over the past 4 years, this is secondary performance indicators from the state of Florida based on our Perkins data. So for the students who stick around with us and are concentrators in our program, meaning they have taken at least 3 courses within a single program, you can see our graduation rate among these students is at 98.69% for the 17-18 school year. We won't get 18, it's a lag year, so we won't get 18-19 data until next year this time. But you can see we are outperforming the state, and we even outperform the targets that we set with the state each year. So we're the red. That's our actual performance in terms of graduation rates for our CTE students. We couldn't do what we do without strong partnerships, and I want to emphasize that this is only a sampling. So we would have 50 slides if we tried to list all the people who help us do what we do, because we really truly could not do what we do without the support of the many businesses and organizations that support our schools. So whether they're coming into the schools as guest speakers, they're hosting our students for job shadowing, they're coming here to help our students with resume writing or mock interviews, whatever it is, we're very fortunate to have such a really strong support system when it comes to our partnerships. At the core of all of our CTE programs are soft skills, and I don't think I need to go too deep into this, but they are embedded in all of our curriculum frameworks. We're guided by programs of study. We're looking constantly to see where we can expand into new CTE programs, particularly as we try to expand in the PSAV area with our adult learners. We have articulation agreements. In fact, we met with Palm Beach State yesterday to work on our secondary to post-secondary articulation agreements. We're actually coming up with a brand-new cosmetic look of the agreement to make it easier for students to understand, but we are articulating to make sure that students aren't repeating coursework that they've already learned while they were in the academies with us. We're leaders continually in industry certifications, and again, we're in the process now of schools entering their 18-19 data, but as of 17-18, you can see the top 10 certifications that were taken, and then the top certifications that were earned with the highest pass rates. Again, when you look at the needs of our industry out in the community, the certifications that our students are earning are in those areas. They're in the healthcare area, they're in the IT area, they're in the construction and drafting areas.
Breathe. So as we move, this is a slide that the state got to see, and we were able to present it, but this is an impressive slide. We are an outlier. We are an incredible outlier. We not only are half the size of Miami-Dade, but we are even with them, if not more than them, in industry certifications, which is really, this is why we get nationwide looks. What's more important about this data is in middle school level, there for the entire state of Florida, Palm Beach County is 30% of industry certifications earned in the middle school level, because we went all IT in every middle school a couple years ago. So everyone's trying to catch us, and we got to stay on top of our game. But this slide, if there's one slide that encapsulates what our students and teachers are doing on the front lines and amazing jobs in these schools, this is it, and it's an impressive slide. It puts us in just a different category as everyone else.
Okay. And I would be remiss if I did not talk about our fabulous IB programs. We have some of the best IB programs in the nation. I'm very proud to also announce today that last week we found out that one of our MSAP schools, Palmetto Elementary School, thanks to the work of Sandy Wesson and Tanya Johnson and the team for MSAP, they are now an IB World Authorized School. And so we look forward to having other schools that have been funded with our MSAP dollars to get that same authorization. One of the things I wanted to point out for IB, though, that some of you may or may not know, we have also something called the International Baccalaureate Career Program, which basically combines IB and a career academy together. And so last year, we haven't been doing that for too long, so we're starting to see some of those students get those certificates now. So last year, we had 78 students to get that International Baccalaureate Career certificate. We continue. We just talked about the arts. We have fabulous art programs, and we have some ideas around some new things. Our JRTC programs are stellar. We've talked about our STEM and STEAM programs as well. So as we move forward, we are looking to see if we can do some interest surveys of our students, just to make sure that what we're offering is really what the students are interested in, but keeping that balance of student interest with the needs of industry and whether or not there's actually going to be employment and a career path out there for them. Another area that we're looking at is making our audition process, streamlining that so that it's clear as it can possibly be for parents, so that there's no misunderstandings about how the process is. We're building a section on our department website. We've been collaborating with our art schools, getting ideas, talking about some of the questions and challenges that we've had from parents. And then the other thing is also to building a site where anyone who might be interested and meets the qualifications to become an adjudicator, building that as well. We talked about expanding out on those interactive choice maps and finalizing that, and we'll be working throughout the summer to do that, and hopefully we'll have that finalized by the fall. And then looking again to expand in our CTE programs and conducting some program reviews. We had talked about program reviews last year, but we kind of held off on those program reviews because we knew, based on some of the language coming down from Perkins 5 and some of the things that we were hearing that were coming from Tallahassee, we wanted to make sure that we didn't put something in place and do a review and then had to go back and do something different based on the needs required of Perkins 5. We are in the process now of reviewing some recommendations that have been submitted from principals for programs for FY21, so we'll be bringing those recommendations and ideas back to you guys in the fall. So what are we missing, and what are your questions?
You really ready for that? Mrs. Whitfield, we'll start with you.
Thank you. All right, so I have been going through this whole going to middle school process. So I have everything's settled, we're fine. But I have had a lot of comments from people in the community about it. So I just want to talk to you about that briefly, and you can answer some publicly maybe. So first of all, middle school, for some reason, people don't like middle school. And I think it's the children, probably. They're terrified of the age. But I do think we need to do a better job of advertising our middle schools, because I can so easily convince a parent to go to an elementary school that's in our district and a high school that's in our district, really across the board. But when it gets to middle schools, everyone's terrified, and the only acceptable answer is like one, right? Mm-hmm. So I think we're messing up something there. And one of the ways that I think that would be helpful is tours, like physical on-site tours, because as a parent, when you take your kid out of that elementary, happy, everyone loves your child space, and then you move them over to middle school where it's terrifying and all that, actually walking through the classrooms and seeing the kids, I really think it makes a difference. So I don't know how we do that in a way that doesn't overwhelm our principals and our staff, but possibly with the choice coordinator position, even if they schedule it on some days. I've actually sent people to days that are supposed to be tour days, and it's kind of fallen apart on that day, where they felt like nobody was ready for them, or they weren't expecting people to come. So, I think I've seen it go well too, but I think that specifically going into middle school, you really have to coddle the parents a little bit so they feel comfortable. Yeah, it's terrifying, absolutely terrifying. Okay, so there's that. The second thing, I had a fifth grader complain about this, and I thought this was interesting. When you do the audition process for all of our arts programs, they were thinking, and you can tell me why you do it this direction, but could they find out whether or not they passed the audition before they had to choose which school they wanted to go to, so that if they don't pass any auditions, they understand that, and then they don't have to
I'll address that.
apply?
That's been a historical practice. Doesn't make it right because it's historical. It makes it right because if the child tries out for multiple things and doesn't pass it, then they get other options, and they get ability to have more choices than anyone else did. So what it does, it'll crowd the system where people are trying out for everything, and it doesn't have any consequence to it. We have such a valued piece of a school center up in North Palm, and we know that as we're expanding that, but that would give an unfair advantage to students that would load up those and then still have the opportunities, multiple choices after that. So that is the key reason why that would be, because we'd accelerate from about 3,000 auditions to about 10,000 auditions with that.
Yeah, I can see that. That would make sense. So the other thing about the North Palm problem is that I think there's just a funding balance in some of our schools when we talk about foundations and the way that they are supported in some spaces and not supported in others. And it's hard, I think, for a parent, if you were to take the labels off of everything and just put how many resources your student is going to get at certain schools versus others. I think that is really an unfair thing to ask of our parents, is that I'm sorry you didn't win the golden lottery ticket to go to the school where you're going to get a bunch of community funds as well. And then I think some of our principals are really good at writing grants, trying not to name names of schools that have done well, but I think that, we have to be realistic as a school board, looking at what is really happening within these schools and how is that equitable, because, I really want our kids to want to go to our schools. I think we do a really, really good job of taking care of children when they're there, but it's hard for me to tell a parent, no, it's going to be fine to go to your home school when they desperately wanted to go to a choice program and they were going to get a bunch more resources there. So I don't know how we fix this, but I do think that there has to be some sort of way for us to at least acknowledge those differences within schools, because it just doesn't seem like a fair conversation to be having. And then obviously, I really think it comes down to a lot of advertising at schools. When we do have something special at a school, and that school may not be the one that everyone thinks of as like a great school, we have to find a way to advertise it. I love your videos. I think that's been a really cool thing that you've done to put the word out and let people know about that. But I really think we have to do something. Like I noticed you're going into the communities that haven't been reached so much, which is awesome, and obviously we need to do that. But I think we also have to go out into the communities that are traditionally applying to the same school over and over and over again because their best friend went there and they have to go. And I want to show them that we have really good programs other places too. Thank you.
Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you, and I really do enjoy working with you with the choice programs. I think you are cut above all of the other districts. But just a few little pointers, and maybe you already have this going on and I don't know anything about it. Everybody on that day when they get selected for the choice, everybody's excited once they're selected. But what about the students that don't get picked up? Do you have a way to communicate with some of those parents immediately? I don't know if you have something by technology where they can click in, where there's some counseling notes, some people to call, because sometimes they may not have been selected and they may be on the wait list and they need to know what that means to be on the wait list. Maybe they weren't selected at all, so then they begin to call maybe a board member or dial your phone and may not get anybody. But is there a way to kind of look at that pool of parents who are in a desperate manner? They tried so hard to get into Bach or some of these other places.
So we do have that measurement. We have a separate email box that when they get that notification, it says you can have any questions, and we man it for the first couple weekends, 24 hours a day almost, because parents want to know right away. So we are working on Saturdays and Sundays to make sure they get that. We also let them know some programs that are open still that would take a late application, and they would be able to be they would qualify for, even get transportation. So we do have that backup. We'd like to do a little bit more, but immediately once they get that notification that they didn't get in, they have an opportunity to email us back directly with any questions, but we also show them that there's other programs they can apply for that have still no waiting list, and a late application would be accepted for that program as well.
Thank you, and I know that you do that. I just get some of the fallback on some of those. Also, another piece of that would be some of the schools, such as Santa Lucia's has a wonderful law enforcement police program, and we have one at Glade Central. So when you're looking at some of the ones that are really heavy duty with a lot of support from the community and from police and everybody else working with these children, how do you make sure that others get a chance to get it? You know, because some of them are at a different level than others. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes.
They're
Right.
much greater in.
Right, and some of our criminal justice in particular, we do have some outside organizations that have come in and partnered with us, so you may see some additional support in those areas, and so we're looking at how we can garner additional support for the schools that don't currently have those. Some of the organizations support us even with providing us with police officers as instructors, so that's saving us some money there in terms of teachers. But that's definitely an area that we can take a look at. In terms of access, like at Santa Lucia's, their program is an in-house program, so they're only taking in students who are zoned for that school. And so when we go back and take a look at the decision-making and the driving forces, part of being in-house versus choice also has to do with the capacity of the school. So if a school has multiple programs, sometimes when the program comes on board, they may leave the program as in-house because they don't have the capacity to bring in any additional out-of-boundary students. And that can fluctuate back and forth. So 5 years ago, maybe they were choice, and now 5 years, there's been a lot of growth in the area, so now they have chosen to make that program in-house because they're no longer getting very many, if any, out-of-boundary seats. So we do pay attention to that, but that's something we can take a closer look at in terms of the support.
Dr. Robinson.
Okay, so thank you. We've come a long way, huh? So let me start off by saying, I know you guys think that I harass you and all that kind of stuff, okay? So you are good, right? We have a very, very, very good choice and career program. I want to make this thing outstanding, and I want to make it equitable, right? I continue to say, and it's through no fault of yours, and I don't really know how to fix this, but the choice program continues by virtue of the process to discriminate against children who don't have a caring adult in their life who's paying attention to the fact that they need to fill out an application 8 months before school starts and possibly audition, which would make it 9 months. And so that part is what it is. I don't know what the fix is there, but I just know that all children are not able to take advantage of our greatness here. Yeah. And that is what gives me heartburn. So I have a number of things. I do appreciate you attempting to address all the issues that I sent to you in email, right? My intent in requesting this workshop is I want the board to see, I want all of the board members, each of the board members, to see what I see in terms of the holes in the choice program, right? And where there's room for improvement, because some of that room for improvement is going to be a budgetary allocation, which is clearly, what we vote on, right? So I just want to mention a few things. So one, you mentioned the survey. And I think that is something Dr. Licata and I spoke about. And so I would hope that we would get follow-up on that survey before it goes out to the students, and maybe to the parents. That's room for development, right? Mm-hmm. So transportation, we have got to have a follow-up workshop, and we've got to show the board and the public that outstanding GIS or whatever that thing is called with the drive. Oh my, that thing is just so awesome. But the purpose of that is, again, to see the holes. I know you guys know. I've talked to you until you understood what I was saying, right? But this is the thing, because if we don't provide transportation, we are effectively denying access to the program, right? And so transportation is a key. Okay, Mrs. Paul left. But Mrs. Paul did say, and I'm gonna put it on the public record, that she was looking at offering like smaller transportation options for the programs and locations that would have fewer kids, that we don't have to send a huge school bus, but the child will still have access. Because I think that that's part of the fix. So we have to balance the cost of adding a new school bus stop and with adding a new program, which then adds to the complication when you have the singleton, or when you have a program that's dependent on that one outstanding teacher who is holding that program together and making it all superlative, right? So, if it's that kind of situation, it seems to me we need to figure out how to add some additional bus stops or provide more transportation. But, and those are the kind of details that I know you guys know, but in these presentations, you make it seem kind of simple, and it's not, right? No, I know. I know it's not, but I'm just hoping everybody else up here starts to grasp the complexity of this thing, because until we get the complexity, then we cannot make it just truly, truly, truly outstanding.
Dr. Robinson, if I could interrupt you, I just want to thank you for that statement, because one of the things that makes those demographics that we showed earlier is because we spend millions of dollars in transportation. And it doesn't happen that way without that. And we do have those holes, and that's what we're working on. But I even believe that Dr. Fenoy, when he arrived, couldn't believe that we provided transportation to so many choice programs. But it doesn't happen unless we provide that transportation. We know that. So that push by you to get that thing by Jerry and Shane from transportation, which is awesome, we're going to continue working on that. But that is a credit to why we have such great demographics.
And I want the board, I think the board understands it, but, and Peter's right, when I first got here, we are one of the few districts in the country to provide this much transportation for kids, like literally. In the districts that I worked in, you would have, every parent has to get into a Walmart parking lot at 4 o'clock in the morning, and then they get on buses for 2 hours. we've done a Herculean task. But there, to your point, Dr. Robinson, there are large budgetary complications associated, because at this point, we can't pull it back. And so with trains and buses, we're basically planes, trains, and automobiles at this point when it comes to transportation.
Exactly. So I just want to continue here. So I don't think this presentation has adequately explained to the board the comparisons of programs, right? So I get when it's a CTE program, if it's IB, one of the things that really gave me great assurance as a parent when my son was in the IB program is that this was like internationally standardized. So I was pretty clear that what level of rigor he was getting. And so, but I don't think that we had that kind of, and I know you try, but we do not have that standardization in the rigor across all programs with similar names. And then, of course, is the issue of the names, right? Is it a STEM or MST and all this other stuff, which needs to get cleaned up. I mean, we just need to get that cleaned up in order to communicate to our customers what this thing is, right? I think that the teacher's credentials is some variability there. I'm not saying all this needs to be like laid out in public, but I think it's part of the analysis that you must do and share with us as individual board members at a bare minimum. The whole issue of this converting to a choice program that had students from outer boundaries to now just being an in-house program, I think is something we have to put a halt to that. We have to figure out how we balance that. Now, if we're going to have a program that is in-house, then where is that program over here? So I'm going to talk about the equine or pre-vet or whatever it is, right? Okay, because my children do not have access to that. Some of my babies want to be veterinarians, okay? And they don't have access to that. And so we just have to get real with that. I mean, I understand that we will probably never get to the point that I want us to, but I need to see us moving, forward with addressing these issues. Now, the other thing is that, and I've got a few more. Hang on for me, Ms. Andrews. Okay, so the whole definition of success, right? We have not yet really clearly defined how we look at success. So for me, I wanted to look at PYG for subgroups by program by school, right? So I think that gave Mr. Howard some heartburn. But I think we need to have a conversation with Mr. Howard and his team about how do we statistically measure success. We know one of the measures of success is whether or not children apply for the program, right? We know that. And then the percent who successfully complete. So let me talk about these industry certifications. So you presented us with data on participants, right? The disaggregation of the participants. You did not provide us with data, with disaggregated data on those who earn their certification, right?
No, that's in there. The IC, those are earned.
I didn't see that. No, by data. Okay, so if I overlooked it,
I'm about participating and passing.
I'm
rates?
Sorry?
Passage rates? Is that?
By race.
Okay, just tell me what
Or
slide
by
it is.
demographics?
I will admit that I see graduation.
No, those are,
There's one in there that shows the top 10 in terms of the top 10 that earned and had highest pass rates.
Okay.
and those numbers, even that special chart is all that is what is earned. Remember, we're operating right about the state average of 78%, 77% for passing. So those earned is 77% of the total group that has passed.
Okay, I'll look through it again. So the other thing is, so in your outreach, I think you got some fabulous outreach, and that QR code thing, that's just like awesome. I love that, right? But in your list, I don't see anything where you're outreaching to the African American community. Did I miss that too? I'd be happy to have missed it.
Well, we do. We're everywhere. So we're at all the schools.
No. Targeted.
Targeted.
So
Community
I'm clear.
centers.
We need to go
Libraries.
to the Haitian churches, for example. You
Oh, yeah.
have them
Yeah, we do.
listed,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah.
So I'm talking about specific outreach to the black community.
Gotcha, okay.
Okay? All right, so now, the other thing is I want to talk about these arts programs without auditions, because come to learn that some of them exist, right? And just, I think maybe compare and contrast access. I'm just talking about access to this, because I think if children go to programs they're interested in, they're going to be more engaged in whatever definition of success you have, they're more likely to be successful. So, I want to talk about blind auditions, right? I didn't hear that mentioned.
Well, that's part of the conversations we're having with schools around the auditions and the adjudicators. So we have had very extensive conversations about the pros and cons for that, for doing blind auditions.
Okay.
I just didn't say it today.
So just so the board knows, I don't know about the rest of you. Every year I get numerous phone calls from parents who feel that their children were, scored low, right? Many of them who had, so we're going to talk about our schools, had their own private lessons beforehand, blah, 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 right? All that. And so at least to minimize the perception of bias, I think that we need to push to blind auditions in the art areas that you could do blind auditions in, right? And so I'm kind of tired of trying to make everybody happy and all that kind of stuff. I mean, this is good for kids, right? And I don't see how it's bad for the adults, except for the adults who want to keep certain people out. I don't see it any other way. Now, the issue of the adjudicators, so I was initially told adjudicators needed to be teachers, and then I saw in a purchasing report where we paid people who were not teachers to be adjudicators. So people are reporting things to you that are not true, okay?
No, adjudicators have never all been teachers. They're community. They could be community instructors, but they could be qualified through their arts, and that is established. They could be artists and residents. A majority are teachers, though. That is correct.
Okay.
But there
then
are.
I'm going to conclude that I imagined that, and I'll check with the other people that were in the room when I was told that. Okay. So now let's move on. But what I do need you to check, though, is this issue of people who teach at private art academies being adjudicators.
We've had that discussion as well, and we have a form that adjudicators have to sign where if they are an adjudicator and a student comes before them that they have done private lessons or singers of the Palm Beaches or whatever they've had, church choir, that they will recuse themselves, and that's part of a form that the adjudicators sign off on. So we've addressed that in our meetings around the adjudicators.
Okay, I'm just going to ask that we figure out something a little bit stronger, like maybe the principal signs off. I'm just suggesting that because, I just had the report 2 days ago about reportedly the one school, all of their kids magically get in. They pass audition and get the golden ticket through the lottery. Okay. And just the singleton programs, if we can address those. I know you guys are working hard. I know you have done good work. I just want all of our children to benefit from it. Oh, and then a follow-up on the behavioral health academies. We talked about that. We talked about building our own
We talked about that, too, since the last time we talked, yes.
If you could just maybe give us a memo that says where we are with that. And then, so the last, okay, two more things. And this is something that cannot be answered immediately. How do we use our analysis of choice programs to improve the schools that children are not choosing? Okay? We have schools that have multiple choice programs, in fact, that children are not choosing, right? So it's not working. So how do we use that data, and when we get to whatever Mr. Howard's statistical measures of success would be, how do we use that to improve what we're doing? Because right now, we're just continuing to add on.
Right.
Somewhere along the line, I think we probably need to stop doing something. I'm not sure what that something is, right? But if it's not meeting our definition of success, that we need to come to some common agreement what that is, then we need to reevaluate the school's program, okay? And then the last thing, and this I've brought up before, should we give priority to students who have formerly been low performing in terms of getting into a choice program? And I think that's something that the board needs to have a conversation around. But I think it's something that we should consider, because if you say engagement is part of the answer, and if I'm into STEM, or that's fascinating to me, but I haven't been living up to my own abilities yet, and you get me in a STEM program, now you can entice me to reach higher.
So when we did the research to try to look to see what other districts were using for entry criteria and those kinds of things, we ran across in Orange County, they actually looked to see whether or not the student can accommodate the magnet-themed courses within their schedule as part of the entry criteria. So right now, we don't do that. So if a student applies and they happen to be level 1 or level 2, when they get to the school, sometimes they may or may not be scheduled right away in those choice classes, but we do everything we can to bring those students up to the academic level so that they do have the room in their schedule to be able to schedule them. So sometimes it's because we are up against other requirements in the student schedule that we kind of have to battle whether we can get the kids into the programs or not.
In high school, the 7th period day makes it easier. So many of our kids, the CTE programs, are in those programs already. Middle school gets more challenging if they are required to take other remedial courses on that 6-period day.
And if a child is selected into a program and their level 1 and 2 and their schedule doesn't permit them to go in a middle school, be able to attend that program right away, none of the principals are allowed to return that child right then and there. Absolutely not. They stay at that school, and we try and work to make sure they get back into that program. So that would make it a requirement, and we do not do that. If they are a level 1 student and they're still in their remediation, the principal knows that that student stays at that school, and we try and work through it so they can get into that academy while they're there.
Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you. I'd just like to share with you, I love the Megatronics program out at West Tech. That's awesome. It's at the middle school and high school level, and it's really, truly making a difference, as well as the Construction Academy. So you're doing some great things, but I wanted to ask you about one other place that I've been looking at since I've been on this school board, and I've been asking about it. And I know that you may say, well, how can we do it? How can we get that kitchen up and running at Turning Points? We got that wonderful building there, and it probably has to be scaled back. I don't want somebody to start a fire or have a knife or anything like that, but I know we can do some kind of program at a lower level scale with some of the top students at the program at Turning Points, and then eventually gradually work them up. That's a wonderful facility that we spent all that money on, and it's still sitting there. So I would like for us to look at that. And I wonder, what do we do with some of the alternative schools? I mean, these would have to be in-house programs, but I think when students have problems at their traditional school, if they can go to one of the alternative schools and pick up something from choice, a teacher there that could do that. When you say what the next steps are, I'd like to see some of that going on. As I've gone to Crossroads, they do some neat things out there, and it's just with all of the teachers there. But there may be a way that we might be able to do something with choice out there, you know, and so we got to look at those kids too, as well as the ESE and ELL students. There should be a way that even at their home school, they could get some priorities to some of these programs. And maybe we're already doing that, so just help me. I know you're doing a lot of things.
Well, Ms. Andrews, I have to say to you, when we were going through this presentation, and we all know that there's definitely opportunity for growth. And as we were going through the data and we saw the statistics with our ESC students and our ELL students, we knew right away that we were failing our students. So we're definitely going into a corrective action mode in regards to the next time we go through this, how can we make certain that we are indeed making sure that those students are inclusive. And not say that they are not going to be successful, but what mechanism and things that we can put in place to give them the opportunity, the same opportunity, because they are in the Exceptional Student Education Program for a reason. And we need to look at our ELL students as well in regards to the challenges, or if they're not applying, why are they not applying? And if they have applied and been dismissed because they're not performing academically or what have you, then what is it that we can do to assist their academia needs? So I do want to assure the board that it's definitely a corrective action piece that we're going to be looking at, because we're not pleased when we look at the data for those two subgroups.
And
if
the
I can tag-
alternative ed students.
Yeah, and if I can tag
Absolutely.
on to that, part of it is also, not that they're not getting assigned, but you have to apply to get assigned. And so that is one of, I think someone mentioned it earlier about more intensive marketing. And if one of my specialists was here, he would like to see us be able to have every school at the showcase, but financially, we're not there yet, because sometimes students and parents don't know what they have at their home school. And so sometimes people are chasing to go to another school because of what they've heard and all these things, but don't even realize they have wonderful programs just like that or comparable to that, that can meet the needs of the students right in their zone school. So marketing is definitely one of the things that we know that we've got to do a much better job at.
Ms. Whitfield and Ms. Brew.
Just really super brief. One of the things that we've been talking about was a high school for the conservatory school. Is that something you guys are still on your future plans thinking about?
We are working with leadership and having those conversations. So when we come back to the table to look at what we're doing for FY21, that definitely will be a part of the conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Brew.
Thank you, and I'll be brief. We have come a long way. I remember the days when we actually asked on the application if a student had a disability. So we've come light years ahead. So I do have a couple of suggestions on that, and then I have another comment. But for the ESC students, to increase the participation, I know we do transition IEP meetings at the end of the year, and I see Mr. McCormick sitting here. Maybe what we need to do is in that last year of elementary school, maybe earlier in the year, have an IEP meeting where the parents are presented with what the options are, or make sure that we communicate it through IEP meetings. Transition IEPs happen too late for them to go in the application process, so maybe it's in 4th grade that we start presenting that information to them. And the same thing with our English language learners is when reaching out to the families, it's really just going to be presenting them those options, because I do know in the past, like, you know, a lot of our, and even today when our ESC parents call me, they don't even realize their children can go into those programs. They're just so grateful their child is getting educated in the regular classroom that they're almost afraid to ask for it. So that's my first piece. The other piece is that, and forgive me, I have feeder patterns on the brain, because what I've learned recently is that when we closed Odyssey, a lot of our students that are up in like Woodlands, they're not going to go to high school with their classmates. It's just we're all over the place. So the question I have is, with these programs that we have, and especially the unique ones, do most of them have a feeder pattern so that if a student in middle school does get exposed to, let's say, the graphic design at Congress, do they have a place they can go, or are we still kind of all separate
There's
entities?
a good pattern of feeder patterns, but some of those singletons provide that difficulty, especially if it only starts in high school. We do have some like programs that they transfer through and go through, but one of our biggest holes was IB, because in the north end and in the central, we didn't have that elementary and middle and high. We've closed that with the MSAP grant, but now that we have that tool that Dr. Robinson has talked about, we're going to be able to see those feeder patterns, because it's going to pull up by program and transportation, and make sure every kid has one or two options if it's not at their school. So that's even going to close the gap even more.
Just as a quick follow-up, when we're looking at that new middle school that we're going to be building, which that's not on our schedule yet, but also the high school, I would hope that we would look at what those choice programs are around those schools, so that we can make sure, because we don't have any high schools out west, so you know that we need, Ms. Andrews and I need as many schools out there that have programs that feed into them. And the same thing with the middle schools, making sure those middle school students are able to continue on their track.
Larry Clausen has met with the team a couple times. We talked about and if you looked at the one chart, what are the high numbers? And those are the numbers that we need it. And when you look at your area, you know, all the middle schools have medical, but you can't get into Park Vista if you're not zoned for it. So medical, obviously, the highest need or highest want, and then the technology right behind it. So that's what's going to definitely be there. So we've been working on that, meeting with them, because that'll help solve some of that issue that we talked about, especially with Santa Lucis and the criminal justice with kids being in-house now since there's no seats. So that'll relieve us a little bit, but he doesn't want to jump on that too much because it's going to be crowded as soon as we open it.
Yep, and we're also looking at the schools that are going to be impacted by the opening of the new high school and what programs they have, because if students now can't go to, I'll use John I. Leonard as an example, they have an ISA program or whatever. So we're looking at the programs that are at the schools that are going to be impacted by the opening of the new school and seeing what we're able to duplicate or replicate at the new school so that students don't lose out.
So I have a couple questions. So can you, with respect to feeder patterns, can you provide, not quickly, because I know it's going to be a little bit of work, can you provide the board with, for example, we want to see all the academy programs that are in the elementary schools and what those feed into. If there's none in a certain elementary school, then go to the middle school in that area and show us where the middle school feeds into so we can actually see on paper rather than clicking on a map to try and figure out what the feeder patterns are. Mm-hmm. I'd like to see, for example, where Boca L would feed into with respect to whatever programs we have at Boca L or at Calusa or the schools in my district. I'd like to see where those elementary schools would go next, because lots of times parents ask us, if I put my kid here, will they have someplace, and I don't know the answers to that, and then it's hard to find it, and maybe the program you're working on that Dr. Robinson is suggesting will do that, but in the meantime, can you just get us in paper?
So that would be a lot of pieces of paper, but one of the things that we have a team, and they're not here tonight either, working on is something very similar to an electronic version of that we could possibly publish. It's through Power BI. So you can click on an elementary school and see what the feeder patterns are, and you can see the middle school and the high school that the school naturally feeds into, and it will list the programs at the elementary, at the middle, and at the high school. So in lieu of, because you would have a stack like this of papers to kind of try to comb through, and I think if we're trying to show parents that information, it may be a little bit too cumbersome for parents, but if we can create something electronically that a parent could go on, like Find My Bus Stop or something like that, where they can see Find My Feeder Pattern, they could click on it and see what programs based on the natural feeder pattern, going from Boca L to Boca Middle to Boca High, what the programs are there.
Okay, thank you. And the other issue, it's something you all covered earlier. When you have some programs that there's prerequisites, so the kids know whether or not they can get in, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So I don't understand why we don't do that with auditions, because a student, if they're not talented enough to get in past the audition, then they're forfeiting their chance to have two choices. So my personal view is, since you have prerequisites for some of the other academies, one of the prerequisites to get into Dreyfus, for example, is you have to be able to sing if you're going to go into the vocal. So the child should know in advance whether or not they have the talent to get into that school. And if they don't have the talent because they don't go through the audition, then they still have two choices left, just like all the other kids that have prerequisites. They know their grades aren't good enough to get into the medical academy, so they're not going to apply to the medical academy. If their talent isn't good enough to get them into a performing arts academy, then they can apply to something else, because that way the child goes into something that maybe they're not talented for, but they have an interest in. And we found out that the kids that go into something they have an interest in, their graduation rate is 98% because they make it all the way through. Because lots of times these kids think they're going to get into Dreyfus or Bach, and they don't get in. And now they have one choice left, but that's their second choice. So I don't know how that factors in to all the people that put that school down as first choice, because this kid put it down as their second choice. So they're behind the eight ball on that one. So I think we need to fix that so that these kids know in advance if they qualify for Dreyfus or Bach or West Boca Performing Arts or whatever schools have the audition.
And that does present a problem, but the little caveat to that is the prerequisites are advertised, and you can compare what you have through your SIS, the students at home, and know their GPA if they qualify for it. So there are some things, and they've had to take this course. So they do have some knowledge that if they got a 2.0 and they're going in for MSc, the requires Algebra 2 honors before you go into freshman year, you're not going to make it. So that is there, but I still see your point, and it's a very good point. Like I said, just because it's historically done doesn't mean it's right. So I agree with your saying, we all do, and we're trying to figure that out, how we can make sure there's more
Well, you
opportunities.
guys are very talented. We probably have the best CT program in the United States, and I'm hoping that when we have to comply with the new governor's directive on telling them about our CT programs, I hope we brag about the fact that we are probably the leader in the state of Florida, if not the nation, so that when he talks about choice, he knows that Palm Beach County has got the right choices already, and we can stop with this crap that goes on up there with respect to we don't offer enough choices. Excuse my vernacular on that one, but you get the point, and I'm
Strike that
tired.
from the record.
And if there's no more questions, we'll end this one. Thank you very much. You guys do a great job. Dr. Robinson, you had a board discussion item on direction regarding upcoming workshop on expulsions.
Yes, thank you. So, in the previous meeting, we ended up saying that we wanted to have a workshop on expulsions. And so this is becoming my habit, is if I make a request to staff, I want to be clear with my request, because one thing I really, really don't want to happen is to have a workshop and then the questions weren't answered because I expected them to read my mind. So for the upcoming expulsion workshop, I started my list. So I could share my list, and then, or if you want to email. But I just want to make the point that I think the board needs to tell staff what their questions are that they want answered in that workshop, because their workshop is kind of time sensitive also, right? And so do you want me to email them or read them?
I would email them so we have a record of them and
Okay.
we'll respond to the entire board.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
Okay.
that's fine.
Yeah, and with respect to that, if any board members have some ideas on what they would like to see at that, make sure you also email to the, who is this going to go to send it to the deputy superintendent? Email to the deputy superintendent. And while we're talking about the one thing that I just want to make sure is we cover the alternative schools, because one of the biggest concerns we have at these expulsion hearings is putting somebody that's not a bad kid in with bad kids. So we need to make sure that we're comfortable with I want to know how those alternative schools are working, and making sure that we have all the stuff we talk about at the closed
That's the
session.
next discussion
Yeah,
item.
you got it all. Dr.
And we've also given the general counsel some of our ideas, so you could just make sure Keith gets them, so we put them all together.
Okay, Dr. Robinson, the next one is
Yeah, so the next one is
it's on-
alternative ed. I know you guys saw my discussion item, so everybody wants to talk about alternative ed. But anyway, so yeah, I want to request that we have a workshop on alternative ed. I think that there's a lot of issues that we as a board need to address. I know staff is working on some tweaks, but I think that the board needs to understand so that we can support the work moving in the right direction. It's not as much to me as good kids going into the school with bad kids. My issue is alternative ed is a place that we should do wraparound. We should have all these agencies and people who say they want to help, come help, right? And so, because it's really a last resort to save many of our children. And so, I want to talk about the pathway. Well, okay, so this is something, if the board says that they want to have a workshop on alternative ed, then I think this is something that we would email to the deputy as well, with the list of things that we want addressed, so that then we can provide some direction at that workshop.
And probably we should schedule those workshops on the same, I hope they don't take 2 hours each, but if we can schedule those workshops on the same day, because they're kind of tied together. What we do with expulsions is tied into what we do with the alternative schools, so. Mrs. Andrews?
Yeah, and I think it's a good idea to go and visit the sites. I did that this year with the deputy superintendent to talk with the principals. And then you have a better idea of what's going on. You get a chance to see the students. So I know school is out, and I don't know when this workshop will be, but it's a good idea to see it. I mean, especially looking at some of the facilities and the problems, it's tremendous. But these children deserve everything that everybody else is getting. So we've got to be knowledgeable so that when we're having supporting the workshop, we know what we're talking about and what we're looking for. So I've got quite a few things I can share with you, Mr. Oswald, as we've been talking a lot about this. But I think a visitation by all of the board members to all of our sites would be helpful before the workshop.
All right, so the next board discussion item is Mrs. Whitfield, physical activity for students.
Will you pass this down? Thank you. Take one. Thank you. So I wanted to talk about this because I was kind of inspired by a conversation that happened on, was it Monday that we were there, Dr. Robinson? We went to go to the conservatory school, and they did a little meet and greet with the guys from High Tech High, which I know some of the staff has had an opportunity to go see. And I just was so impressed with, excuse me, what project-based learning looks like and what a school looks like when it has project-based learning in it. And recently we had our third grade reading scores come out, and when they came out, I thought a lot about what our schools look like and how we should really be going forward. I understand that Mr. Oswald has asked all of the staff to do a SWOT analysis to talk about the things that have gone right and wrong over the last year and what it would do for us to be able to actually be able to do a better job, really improving those scores. But I think even more than that is really improving the school day for the children. I imagine these days that we have at in the classrooms, they're very tough. They're very long. They can be exhausting for the students. In preparation for this discussion item, I did some research online, and as you guys know, one of the things that I used to do was work in physical activity in the PE department here, and we talked always about how much better it would be for our students if they got up and moved during the day. So I did some research, and I looked for an article that would be like kind of an easy sum up of kind of all of these thoughts brought together. So what I've printed out for you is a meta-analysis of physical activity and academic achievements. So they pull together a lot of different articles together to one thing. And one of the last comments at the bottom of it that I really liked was that sometimes parents and teachers think that the implementation of physical activity interventions in school hours, they think it's a waste of time. But actually, according to all of this research, it's actually not a waste of time, but it's an effective strategy to improve academic performance and behaviors. So I think that there's some tie-ins to project-based learning, getting kids up, getting them moving, physical activity during the day, getting the kids to really exercise. In this article, they talk about there's some places where, or maybe I read it in here, but every 45 minutes they do 15 minutes of something that gets them to move. And I think that can be done through integration. I think that it can be done through the projects. I think we have a lot of different ideas about how we get physical activity in during the day. And I just know some schools do a great job and some don't. With the project-based learning, we're seeing parents really want to see this happen. And the last thing I wanted to mention was John Ratty, who 30 years ago wrote a book called Spark, the Revolutionary New Science of Exercise and the Brain. And what he said then really holds true today still, is that aerobic exercise performed daily prepares your brain to learn and improves mood and attention. And I think we have to look at how we can tackle this as a school district. I don't think continuing to push harder and harder and harder on our teachers and our students is really going to get the outcomes that we're looking for. So I wanted to see how the board feels about it, and if they are as interested as I am in moving forward with, as we look to how we're going to improve our school day coming up in the next year, starting to focus more on less pushing of our students, less hard testing of our students, but more really trying to make sure that school's enjoyable again. I think there's a lot that can be said for creating an enjoyable school day. So I put that out to my board.
Ms. Burrow?
You could see the question mark in my eyes. So I was going to ask Ms. Whitfield, are you looking at just elementary school in particular?
So I think what we have to do is start with elementary for sure. I think that would be a really great way to really start with this, is to tackle that. But eventually I would love to see activity. One of the things that John Ratty did in his studies was really focused on getting kids to come in. They did a research project where they did, the kids would come in for a half hour of activity before the school day started. And those kids were compared to kids who were allowed to sleep in. And they found out that there was a 17% increase in people just across the board in schools for high schools. So I think there can be ways to incorporate it into the high school day as well.
Just as a follow-up, one of the things I'm remembering is when I observed my daughter when she was teaching in New York, and there are some teaching styles that actually incorporate that, where like she would get the kids up every 15 minutes. They would applaud each other in circles. They did all kinds of arm movements. I've watched her teach several times, and now she's teaching more middle school, but she still does that and incorporates it in. So there are ways to do that without having specific periods of time. But I think that goes, I don't know if that's something that we can control in terms of how the teachers teach in their classes.
Okay.
Are we okay with this?
Yeah.
This one? Okay. Mr. Superintendent, you got it. So the next, you're welcome. You're as tired as I am, I know. So the next item will be Mrs. Andrews' district reading program.
Yes, I think it's an ideal time now to look at what we're doing in the school district for reading. We just received our third grade ELA. It kind of ties in what you just finished talking about, Ms. Whitfield, but we need to kind of assess. I know we do a lot of iReady, but as a school board member, I really want to see a picture, a snapshot, a discussion about what we're doing in reading, and I'm not talking about just elementary. We hopefully will be getting our scores and the other grade levels too. And when we see ourselves and picture ourselves with what we're doing, we may need to make some changes. So it's really important that we go back and look at what we said we wanted to do to see if it's working. If it's not working, then we need to make some changes. So I think it's an ideal time to get a workshop scheduled so that we can be reacquainted with what we said we wanted to do, and if it's getting us the results that we want. At this point in time, I think we need to look at it and maybe make some adjustments.
Yes, ma'am, we will absolutely be doing it. The team's already started working on that, but we will have that workshop scheduled.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a motion to adjourn the workshop so we can start the next meeting. Motion by Ms. Brill, seconded by Mrs. Andrews. All in favor, all opposed. Motion carries 6-0 with Mrs. McQuinn gone. So call the special meeting to order. Let the record reflect that there are 6 board members here other than Ms. McQuinn, and the superintendent's here, as well as the Inspector General and the General Counsel. The first item on the agenda will be to review and approve the minutes that are listed there. Do we have a motion? Motion by Mr. Shaw, seconded by Dr. Robinson. All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries 6-0. We're adding P1 for good cause. Good cause exists for adding this item to allow employees to begin in their new position as soon as possible. Mr. Superintendent, do you have any other items to add?
No, sir, I do not.
Do you have any items to withdraw?
At this time, I do not.
The board want to pull any items for discussion? Seeing none, we'll need a motion to approve the agenda, the consent agenda, I'm sorry. Mr. Shaw, seconded by Ms. Brill. All in favor, all opposed, motion carries 6-0. Disclosures and abstentions, anybody? Thank God. Superintendent, you have any comments?
Briefly, I just want to thank the entire team for a great graduation season. It was exciting. 30-plus graduations is a task, but we did it, and I want to thank the entire board for their support and all the staff, Eric Stern, everyone at School Police. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It was great. And I will leave my comments right there for right now.
Thank you. Board comments?
So, I just happen to have these flyers that I'm going to pass out because I forgot to pass them out at a community meeting, but just to show you that Broward Schools is having an equity conference, and they're doing some really intentional work around equity, and so I just want to share that information. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Any other comments, Mrs. Andrews?
Yes, thank you. Just last week, I attended the graduation at West Tech, and we had 70 graduates coming out with certifications in HVAC, plumbing, electrical, carpentry, welding. So I've shared with Ms. Paul as well as the superintendent, this is a recruiting base for us to help us in our area of maintenance. We had young people as well as middle-aged people and people a little older than middle-aged getting their certificates, and they're ready to work. So we need to come up with a system on how we can be on the front end of these students before they actually start the programs. And I think North Tech may have had a graduation, I don't know, Dr. Robinson, so it's more than 70. So we've got all these people that just graduated with us, and we need to make sure that they have a job. And we're the largest employer. Let's get them hired. Thank you.
Any other comments? I'll take us to two agenda item speakers. We have one, Julie Clark on CSA. Would you please come up to the podium? And you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. I'm here actually on one of your consent agenda items on behalf of Imagine Chancellor, and I just wanted to make you aware that I was here in case you had any questions. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We need a motion to approve the consent agenda. Motion by Mr. Shaw, seconded by Mrs. Whitfield. Any discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Mr. Superintendent, P1.
P1, I recommend the board approve the personnel agenda as submitted.
Motion by Dr. Robinson, seconded by Mrs. Andrews. Discussion?
Yes.
Mrs. Andrews.
I really won't be able to vote on P1. I saw a lot of wonderful names there, but I did have some concerns about one appointment. So at this point in time, I've made those concerns to the superintendent and as well as the deputy, but I won't be able to vote for P1. Thank you.
Any other discussion? So I just want to welcome Assistant Superintendent Secondary Mr. Craig to, I know that. I know we have to vote. In a minute, we're going to make you the Assistant Superintendent of Secondary, but I just want to welcome you to Wednesdays. This is what your Wednesdays look like from now on. We start around 1, we finish around 8, so I'm sure you'd much rather be back in your high school seat, but in any event, in a minute, we're going to make you a permanent resident of Wednesdays. So if there's no more discussion, all in favor? All opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Congratulations, Mr. Assistant Superintendent. 5-1, I'm sorry, 5-1, Mrs. Andrews opposing that one. And yeah, instructional superintendent. Yeah, it's been a long day, There's a motion to adjourn by Ms. Brill, seconded by 5 board members. All in favor, all opposed. Motion carries 6-0.